So, once again, a very, very warm welcome to this State of AI event organized by I.E.C.T, AI Austria, and hosted by Werkstätte Wattens. Thank you very much. We've heard two very, very, very interesting keynotes so far. Super interesting. We will be writing about them. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything. And this event is happening within the I.E.C.T Summer School of Entrepreneurship. Awesome event. Talking about diversity, 80% or 70% of startups taking part in the summer school are female. Hermann, how was that possible, actually? What kind of tricks did you do to make it happen?
I'm looking at the organizers. I actually don't think it's 70%. It's a little lower, but it's very, very large compared with the normal startups that we get.
Anything beyond 10% is amazing.
Absolutely.
Already. And on the other hand, we have amazing diversity also on the cultural side, so to say, as well within startups. 60 nations, I think, that applied, as also on this stage. So I'll ask you at the beginning, after I introduce you, also just to give me your background, your cultural background, where do you come from? So let me start with Nancy Nemes, Miss AI, so to say. Nancy, you want to enable 10 million women in Europe by 2023 to know how to cope with AI, to understand AI, and to be able to deploy it. Great, great project, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Big applause for Nancy. Just give me your background. Where do you come from? What kind of cultures do you combine?
I am Romanian. I was born in Romania. I live in Germany. I used to live in Italy, France, and the US.
Amazing. We have Hermann Hauser, obviously, needless to say, needless to introduce, but still I will use the definition of Nancy, Bill Gates of Austria, and then you were corrected, Nancy, by everybody, Bill Gates of Europe, in terms of technological impact with your investment and with your activity. Hermann Hauser, big round of applause. Hazem Nakib, founder of Cambridge Blockchain Hub, together with Hermann, and also founder of Sentinel Capital Group, a corporate innovation incubator, very interesting project. You have many, many more companies, a lot of functions in advisory boards, in startups and investment companies. It's great to have you here, and please give us also your background. Where do you come from? What kind of cultures do you bring with you?
Yeah, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Canadian Lebanese, and I've lived in probably 10 or 12 countries around the world.
Perfect. Big round of applause. Siraj Khaliq, Atomico partner, invests in deep tech startups. We heard a lot about you. Our video audience, not yet, so please, so to say, give us also your background on where you come from.
Sure, yeah. Apologies, it's a hard name to get right. I'm English and Pakistani, and I spent my life also in many countries, but the last 13 years before recently joining Atomico was in Silicon Valley.
Great. Thank you for being here. Big round of applause. Hermann, I forgot to mention, obviously, Austria and UK is your background, so you're also...
That's right.
And last but not least, that's Tran from Axel Springer, head of AI. You gave us a lot of insights on what Axel Springer is planning to do in the fields of AI. Awesome, awesome presentation. Thank you for being here, and please give us also your background.
I'm German Vietnamese, so I was born in Vietnam. I was brought to Germany when I was 3. I'm based in Berlin. I'm a Berliner. One of the few Berliners, I would say, because there's a lot of influx of foreigners coming in, and it's really cool. I also lived in a lot of different countries as well, but I always like to return back to the roots where I'm from. And also, I'm very happy to be there because I want to build a stronger community here in Europe because I'm European.
Good.
Perfect. So we're going to be talking about this aspect of Europe. You said in your presentation, Siraj, as well, the European advantage, and this will be my starting question after answering my first starting question, Nancy. Siraj said in his presentation, either you do AI or you will vanish, so to say. Your company has no chance on the market in the near future. Trying to understand this statement, is this a revolution coming upon us, or is it a kind of evolutionary development? We're talking about AI, the speed of change, the speed of development of this technology. Is it something that's just going to come upon us, or is it evolution and developing evolutionary?
Look, if we look at life and human being at large, we all evolve over time. So humans are a produce of evolution. And I think that's applicable to technology. Of course, we are hyping AI. Of course, it's interesting. Mostly, it is interesting because our brains, half of the time, and this has been researched by really smart people, who said that half of the time, our brains are fooling ourselves. And if you look into that, and then you go look into what happened in the last 20 to 30 years in the high-tech space, you realize that 20 years ago, we were still talking about voice recognition, we were still talking about facial recognition, we were still talking about the high-speed internet and the infrastructure that we need to have. And so we had companies in the automotive space at the time where we were trying 20 years ago to use Windows CE to basically have a product in a car, in a BMW or a Ford, that would speak, well, we would be capable of speaking to that product as well. We're driving yesterday from Innsbruck over here, and I was quite frustrated because there was a lot of roads within this beautiful area, and Google Maps was kind of a little bit confused, and I would have loved to tell Google Maps with my voice what I want rather than typing on my smartphone while driving. And so that is an evolution for me. We are not yet there. There is a huge leap forward that we need to take. And for me, it's, of course, the survival of the fittest. And it's an important aspect of being digital Darwinists and being aware of that, but also being realists and being standing with our feet on the ground and understanding that we need a lot of optimism and courage, but we also need to take action now, which has been said many times already.
Now, nevertheless, Siraj, you mentioned that the Prognosis says in the next 20 years strong impact should come, but you cut it down to 5 or 10. I saw Hermann Hauser also nicking in the audience. So what do you guys think about this prognosis? Evolution, revolution? Is it going to be more revolution than evolution in terms of time span?
So the impact is already felt, right? We use products every day, multiple times a day, without even realizing it. That would not be possible without AI. And you could approximate it, you could do an okay job in some cases, but still it wouldn't be nearly as useful. So for some companies, it's already here. If you're not using machine learning to make predictions, then why would anybody use you? For some companies, it's revolutionary. You do it today or you're done. For some companies, it's going to be more evolutionary. So just to give you a couple of examples, right? If Google had not come up with Google Assistant, or the kind of voice assistant they have today, and Amazon were to just succeed and dominate with Alexa, their Echo devices, then Google would lose one of their biggest sources of revenue, which is how people search for things, because search is now shifting from text-based to people asking for things. So it's super important for them. It's not an evolutionary thing, it's a revolutionary thing. They have to do it. If they don't, they could do it 3 years from now, it'll be too late. So they're getting on this bandwagon. If you're a drug discovery company, so the way drugs are discovered today is super expensive. So $50 million is one estimate for how long it takes to get something, promising new drug into clinical trials, phase 3 clinical trials, and kind of past that. That's a very, very expensive process. If you're able to do this for 5 million or 1 million, then you have such an advantage over the incumbents that other than capital, which is something that you would get funded pretty quickly by big funds like SoftBanks or at the early stage ourselves or Amadeus, you will just kind of totally dominate that market. And companies like Helix in Cambridge, or there's a number of companies like Recursion in the US, they're actually doing this and having some real success. So these companies just have to adapt. You could say there are some companies like, you can imagine the construction industry, right? The biggest construction company in Europe, if they don't use AI tomorrow, will they go away? For them, it's a different cycle. But in time, they will need to as well, because the efficiencies for what they're doing will get, somebody else will come along, be more efficient, be able to build the same building for 20% less. They'll gradually get all the customers. So it's a different cycle, but it is still one, even for some industries that are a little slower.
I've heard that you have a lot of biotech and medtech startups in your school, and this is an interesting field. I was talking to technologists from Pfizer a month ago, and they said that the medication development cycles would be 4 times to 5 times faster than now. They need $10 billion to develop one medication, and they're not sure whether it's going to be accepted from the market. Hermann, is this the impact that we're going to be seeing soon also in the pharma industry and other industries?
Absolutely, and Siraj has listed an excellent set of companies where AI already plays a very important role, and he's also mentioned Telex, where we're both invested, that deals with rare diseases and using quite sophisticated AI techniques to make much faster progress than was possible in the past. I would like to just point out 2 key step changes that have happened in AI. Because what normally happens in any development is you don't get a smooth increase in the underlying technology. Until ImageNet, anything that was developed in AI, because it had such a bad name, just became normal software and wasn't called AI anymore because people were almost ashamed to call it AI. So there was an interesting period of time where any AI technique that actually worked very well, like the, all the algorithms that you mentioned, just became standard pieces of software. With ImageNet, there was this huge step change improvement in the image of AI. All of a sudden, AI was cool because AI could do something that nobody expected would work so well because we had these labeled data. So it really was the breakthrough that was based on large sets of labeled photographs, of labeled pictures. This then spawned the application of lots of lookalike applications that just took large data sets, they got labeled, and it was called supervised learning. One of the big step changes that might be happening just now with BERT is the breakthrough on unsupervised learning, where you don't label it, where you try to get the computer to make sense of a very large data set all by itself. And what we did not expect is that models that have billions of parameters, as BERT can now, the latest large BERT program has 8 billion parameters in a completely unsupervised way, so there's no human intervention, can extract structure from language. These are very large data sets, like all of Wikipedia and all of, lots of literature, etc. And it created amazing results. So one very interesting result, which is easy to explain in this, 2 billion dimensional space, is, of course, the word man has a particular point in that space, and the word king has a particular point, and there's a distance between them, and the word woman also has a particular point. And then if you go the same distance from man to king, and go the same distance from woman to another point, you find queen. So it's really quite surprising that without telling the system that this is a queen, just by knowing that there's this relationship between man and king, it works out the relationship between woman and king. So it sort of captures the basic structure of language in an unexpected and unsupervised way. So we're both invested in GraphCore, and one of the very exciting statements that Simon Knowles, who is really the key technical guru in GraphCore, made during the board meeting is that some people believe that we can extend this approach of unsupervised ingestion of human knowledge to such an extent that maybe we can make these programs so big that they ingest all of human knowledge. And then, this is a vision and a dream, but then we'll get much closer to a artificial general intelligence. So there are now new excitements about the size of models that we can build that didn't exist before. This was a breakthrough that was done at Google just last October. So this is another step function increase in unsupervised learning, and we also have another step function maybe to come with inverse reinforcement learning. Those of you that were at my talk this morning, I said that one of the big problems that we have to solve with AIs that will be very intelligent is how we align the goals, our human goals with the goals that the AIs might have. And inverse reinforcement learning allows us to extract the goals and extract what we really want, not by us saying what we want, and we're very good at articulating our own wishes. This is the genie problem. You know, if you ask somebody what they wish, they normally wish for the wrong thing, that they didn't really want that, as in the genie story. But if you use inverse reinforcement learning, you might be able to tease out from our behavior what we really want. And that might be, you know, a next big step.
Talking about, so to say, the possibilities and strengths, Axel Springer is one of the companies you presented, so to say, the vision of your company today, which wants to be not only a media company, not only to develop further to a technology company, but you want to become an AI company. So what kind of use cases do you see for your company, and where do you want to position yourselves? I've heard a lot of Googles and Amazons and so on, names from Silicon Valley. What kind of roles can European companies play in this field, and in particular Axel Springer?
So I think earlier we had a discussion, like, you know, that if you look at Google or Facebook or any other company, they're very strong at the research, right? And they create a lot of, you know, breakthroughs, like what Hermann said about semi-supervised learning this year and last year, right? There was also kind of a breakthrough in the NLP space. But the problem is, if you look at these models, even at BERT, right, or at the model that was created by OpenAI recently, like the GPT-2, right? What do they need? They need data, right? So data is something that is core for the model and still a limitation of these models, right? So if you think about the limitation as well, these models rely heavily on data, right? If you don't have the data to train your model, the model will not perform well, right? And this is also the strength of Axel Springer. We are a journalistic company. That means we produce a lot of text, right? We produce a lot of German text. And if you think also about NLP as well, NLP is not like images. So if you think about the ImageNet moment, which Hermann described, where basically the first time like you have a machine learning model that's performing better than a human, right? So a human accuracy, right? That's why these models, you know, deep learning has become so fascinating for people, because it's performing as good as a human, not better, I would say, right? Like a human is still very good at things, very, very good at things. And this moment is for like, we're still waiting for this for text, for NLP. I mean, like, for NLP, these models like BERT and GPT-2, they perform really well on a lot of tasks already. But if you still think about text summarization, right? For example, when you have an article and generate a summary of that, I mean, I don't know if you look at GPT-2, like, you know, this is state of the art at the moment. It's complete nonsense what it's created sometimes, right? So it's not, we're not that far where we say, hey, just input some data and generate something out of it and be creative about that, right? And it's also just about the English data, right? English language. It's not about like, if you apply it on German, it's completely different. For example, for images, as I said, you know, you train a model like a cat. Like a German cat looks like, I don't know, like an English cat, right? Like maybe it's the same race, right? I'm not sure. Like humans also look alike, right? Like they have ears, they have eyes, but the German syntax, right, is completely different to the English syntax in some way, or stylistically it's also different, right? So when you ask me about in terms of use cases, I think we have a lot of competitive advantage, right? If you think about the moat, right? So we have a lot of data that we can use to take that advantage, right? To basically create use cases that none of these companies has.
And use cases by applying AI, or do you also develop your proprietary AI?
In the sense, what is proprietary AI? I mean, proprietary AI, there is no proprietary AI at the moment, because at the moment is, if you think about the community, the open source community, right? This is also one of the growing source why we all have machine learning and AI these days, is because people are transparent about things. That's why also we're transparent what we do, because transparency is very important at the moment. So I don't believe that when you create proprietary AI in the sense of algorithm or technology, it will benefit the world at the end of the day, right? So you need open source technologies, tools like TensorFlow, PyTorch, Keras. They all make sense and they all drive our innovations, right? So we will never become a company that patent stuff in the sense of way that we're going to close our tools. So all the stuff that we build will also be open source. But what we don't want to do is we're not going to release the best model, right? Because this is our data, right? This is our competitive advantage, right? And if you think about data monetization, so there's a lot of companies talking about how can I sell my data, right? And it's not about selling raw data, right? It's actually selling the models within that, and the models encaptures kind of this data monetization.
And this is an interesting discussion that we hear in terms of positioning Europe on the global map of AI. Hazem, how do you, so to say, where do you see this European advantage? We heard something, when I ask people about that, they tell me we don't have our own infrastructure, we don't have enough data, we don't have capital. So let's switch the story and let's ask ourselves what are the assets, what are the strengths of Europe, and where do we stand in the field of AI? What's the status in Europe?
Let me say a few other things that I think are relevant to the conversation thus far. We've spoken about whether it's a necessity for organizations and for companies to do this, or if there's going to be some sort of revolution, or if they're going to die. Well, think about it like this. Larger organizations at present, whether publicly listed or not, need to demonstrate some sort of growth yearly, annually, and so on, to their investors, to all of us, to the shareholders, and to the users. In order to do that, they need to figure out new ways of being either more productive or reducing cost in some way. Now, a lot of organizations are using a variety of different technologies, including different types of artificial intelligence, in order to do exactly that, deliver more value. However, we live in a world where some of the most valued organizations are data brokers. They've stored so much value because individuals have given it freely to them, or not necessarily freely, they've accumulated it over the years. That puts them, as has been mentioned by everybody, in a unique position and advantage where they're able to use that data for something specific. All new incumbents clearly don't have that, but an interesting shift, and I do see this throughout Europe currently, both from a regulatory stance, a policy stance, as well as what I think consumers are beginning to ask for, which is this shift, right? Which is demanding more of a personal autonomy approach to an individual's data. Data is changing. Data is becoming much more, I believe, of an asset class where individuals want autonomy over it and control over it. So participating in organizations like Facebook, like this, like that, where individuals freely give their data, that is essentially, there's this boomerang process where it gets revamped, repackaged, or it advises a variety of different predictive functionalities that essentially feed things back to you. There's becoming more and more of this demand to own it, control it, and where individuals and just people are able to contribute them and direct their data to different companies developing more and more solutions. And I do think that that as a kind of core demand by individuals is beginning to move forward, especially from a regulatory standpoint with GDPR, as well as a variety of other initiatives across the EU.
But when we talk about Europe, we have, or Austria, Germany, I think across Europe, we have a lot of SMEs, a lot of smaller size companies. Axel Springer can afford you, for example, to take up this project. Now, if anybody has understood the necessity of dealing with this technology, but does not have the financial means of employing the best people to make the strategy, sure. How do we go about it in Europe, for example, to make our companies, the smaller companies, fit? How much technologies do you have to be able to have AI strategy?
What's the last piece?
For example, if you're a company with 500 people, you cannot afford a Google Ag person, for example. But you understand that you have to do something in the field of AI.
But that's exactly the shift that I'm indicating. That shift is changing, and so individuals are going to be able to participate much more in organizations' crowdsourcing of data. Now, I genuinely believe that the next few billion-dollar companies we're going to see are organizations that are able to rightly leverage crowdsourcing data from individuals, and lots of large organizations currently do it, but it's incredibly limited. It's primarily based on the data they've accumulated thus far. Now, organizations that are rightly able, I think, to leverage communities at both a local and global level, both SMEs and startups will be able to better engage. The Plantic company is a perfect example of that, where individuals are inputting their data because either they believe in the company, there's some sort of reward or incentivization or something like that. Another aspect that we're seeing is primarily geopolitical, I think. We're seeing a lot more money from all over the world coming into Europe, and that's because other aspects of the world there's a lot of tension between them. We're seeing a lot more Asian capital coming in, and we spoke about why this is an issue. We're seeing a lot more initiatives at the EU level providing funding, subsidies, grants, and so on and so forth, because there is an understanding that the entrepreneurial field in general has become slightly threatened, and that's why there are new programs and subsidies and funding mechanisms being put into place, primarily around leveraging different emerging technologies. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and if I may add to that is, we truly need a very broad effort in educating the entire society. We need, in Europe, because we are such a diverse region with so many different languages and cultural backgrounds, we basically have to ensure that everyone has democratic access to information and to education, to understand what AI is and what it can do for people, but also to understand how one can contribute. Because in the next 20 years, skills will be different that will be needed. The type of people that will be needed in this space will be very different. And so what we have to do now is to make sure that the population is not blocking because of fear or because of non-belief, but really embracing. And that is something that both politics, private, public sector can embrace, but also each single person, everyone in this audience can go back tomorrow and really try and enthusiastically understand what this is and how they can contribute in their microcosm, but also for the society at large. Because if Europe really is the region that wants to put the human at the center and really tries to make AI for the society with all elements and looking at it from optimistic point of view, that is a given fact that we have to accelerate that process.
But I don't have the impression that our politicians who are in charge of regulating and leading the debate about this really understand what the need is and what we're talking about.
Well, there are many people that don't understand. There are CEOs that don't understand. There are politicians that don't understand. There are just citizens that don't understand. So debates like this and rounds like this are hugely important, making sure that they are propagated within the media. They're not staying in this room, but really going out there and making sure that we do more of this. And indeed, we have to have a dialogue. We said Europe will thrive on co-creation and collaboration. And having that dialogue, I see a lot of the politicians trying to understand what it is, and it takes some time. But again, it's really an important focus to keep for Europe, because as you know, in Europe we kind of have a bit of an imposter syndrome. We don't know about our strengths. We don't know what Europe brought. Europe brought some of the most amazing, and you have already touched on that, some of the most amazing elements. Deep learning was created in France by Yann LeCun. The first driverless car was created in Germany with Mercedes. It was called Prometheus. It was driving without a driver in 1996 with 180 kilometers an hour on the Autobahn. Right? And so we have that, and on the other side, we have all the elements that we need, but we are not really yet in touch with what we can do. And one other thing is we need stories. We need great narratives. We need excellent examples like yours. We need people to tell what they work about, and we need not to be afraid of doing PR and marketing around what we do. That's why America is so strong. That's why China is coming now with their story about AI in China, and that's what we can do here and have great figures and luminaries like Hermann and others in Austria and in all over Europe that are participating in this and shaping, and their vision is so important to take and share.
I couldn't agree more. If I may make 2 points on this. The core crux of this really comes down to how do you make this a priority for politicians or for government. The way to do that, to make anything a priority, is to say, okay, well, at present, birth rates are declining, the population continues to age. How, for the national economy or for the economy of the EU, do you continue to have growth, economic growth, and increases in GDP, and so on and so forth? That is typically at a strategic level how individuals are going to be looking at it and assessing it. And from that standpoint, you're able to look at, here are all of the alternatives of what works, and this is why we need to do what we need to do as a necessity. And we talk a lot about, the US and China, for example. The US has been terrific and continues to be terrific, in my opinion, at these longer kind of moonshot projects, terrific at the really the first stage of innovations, the first stage of commercialization. In terms of sustainability, when it comes to emerging tech, I would disagree. At present, China has been making several strides forward in their AI, their national AI strategy, delegating to different local authorities to create their own programs locally. And the reason for that is because they understand that they need to upgrade local infrastructure. An example was given of autonomous vehicles, for example. Well, in certain parts of China, they understand that, well, we need to upgrade and include sensors in the roads so that we can increase it even more, so that we can reduce even more the level of possible accidents. So it's that type of shift around moonshot commercialization or moonshot research, initial commercialization, and long-term sustainability. And that's where you really start touching on areas of regulation, local infrastructure, government programs, so on and so forth.
Tat, you want to add something?
Yeah, one important point, of course, Yann LeCun is French, but he, it's called the Toronto Mafia, right? So it's actually a Canadian thing. So even though he's European, it's more driven by Canada at the end of the day. But I just wanted to make a point when you talk about competitive advantage in Europe, right? So I think the competitive advantage in Europe is actually the people, right? The talent. So if you think really about like deep learning or research in general, or fundamental research, for example, Schmidt-Huber invented LSTMs here, right? We have Sepp Hochreiter, we have Google DeepMind, right? So before it was called Google, it was called DeepMind, right? So it was not even an American company. So we have a lot of great talents here, right?
Yeah, but let me provoke. Yes, we have developed those things, but American companies are making business with that technologies.
Yes, because that's our mentality in research, right? So if you think about how research developed in America or also in China, right? These researchers are much closer to corporations. For example, here in Germany, there's recently a time where like this research institute, they cannot really cooperate with like big corporations, and and also research institutes in Germany, like this is what I can say, work really differently to corporations, right? When you think about Google Brain or Facebook AI, right, or Tencent AI, they are of course a research institute, but they work like corporations, right? They are funded by corporations, and they work in a way that they have to deploy something. They have to take the research to production so that it benefits the corporations, right? If you, for example, like at Technical University of Berlin or Fraunhofer Institute, right? What they care about is, of course, I want to release a paper. That's what Google Brain does as well. But at the end of the day, Google want to commercialize their stuff, right? So Google, they invested in DeepMind or they invested in Google Brain not for fun, right? They did it for a certain reason, right? They want to make money. And what we are very bad at the moment is we cannot really take this research into production. We're very bad at this. I don't know.
Why is that?
So, let me just add, I agree with all these points, but one thing I'd add, so one thing that continues to be a problem in Europe is we ask questions like, we're very conservative, and we ask questions like, how do we protect this 500-person business that has been around for 50 years or 100 years? And what can we do? What kind of legislation can we do to protect them against these people? That's not the right answer. And the reason that the US and China are moving fast is because there's actually no right for a business that's not innovating to remain number one, right? You have to constantly earn your position. The Dow Jones 30, up until I think 2 years ago, there's only one company left in the Dow 30 from 100 years before that. And that was GE, and even that fell out a couple of years ago, so there are none now. This is a natural part of evolution and innovation. New companies are founded, they grow because previous ones don't innovate. Previous ones either go away or they merge with some of these new companies. Sometimes the new companies take them over. This is the cycle. We got to embrace that cycle and not just try and be protectionist. This is where I think Europe falls short, because we're always thinking about how do we protect the current businesses. Screw that, right? To be honest, that's not the priority. The priority should be, let's help these new businesses succeed. Let's make sure the funding is there, make sure the talent is strengthened. And in time, that's how we get the Googles and the Facebooks. I do think it's just a matter of time. I mean, we're slow to this new wave. But at the same time, we can't miss this wave, because The reason we're relevant, Europe is relevant today, is because we caught the last wave. If we miss this wave, then 3 generations from now, this is not going to be the best place in the world to live, the way many of us think it is today.
And maybe just to put some numbers into this, there are 35,000 AI companies today in the world, and 25% of those are in the US, 23% in Europe, and 21% in China. So when you look just at the number of what is declared as AI company, you can see a pretty much similar distribution across the 3 continents. And then the question becomes, we ask this question a lot these days, should Europe be #1? Is there a race? There are also a lot of voices saying it shouldn't be a race. AI is not there to be a race. It should be really a collaboration, because if it would be a race, and this is a professor, Virginia Dignum, who says that it would be the wrong race to run. It wouldn't have a positive outcome. So playing on the strengths that you said of Europe is really playing into what Europe can bring that is different. And that is indeed, first of all, putting the human at the center. I much prefer to work in Europe and to live in Europe. I used to live in the US and worked there for many years. I do prefer what we have here in this region is just amazing in terms of quality of life, in terms of access to culture, in terms of access to our own values, the European values. And that's also what Brussels, for example, the European Union is playing in, is where they say basically what we want to achieve also in the AI space is first of all to have the human at the center, to have a healthy planet, and to have real democracies that are working. And when you look at some of the happenings these days in the world, you don't see that much happening. And you still see the good old Europe delivering on many of these aspects.
Hermann, what about the pro-European, so to say, spirit in general? I mean, you live in a country which is leaving Europe, but also you live also in the country which is a part of Europe. How important is, especially also in the future in projects like AI that need a lot of data, they need bigger countries, the unity of Europe?
Yes. Well, maybe the only positive aspect about this stupid Brexit situation in Britain is that it has brought a very strong pro-European feelings in the rest of Europe. So, there were talks about Italy leaving, and now nobody in Italy talks about leaving. They all talk about reforming the EU. So it's not all bad. The aspect of Europe embracing AI and doing something with it, I think is particularly relevant in the health sector, because we have wonderful health databases, and it is, as opposed to the data that we give to Google, nobody expects your personal data to be handed over for free to Google or Facebook or any other US company. It's clear that we're going to be very protective of our health data in Europe. And because so much AI can help our health system so much, I think one of the next waves of AI, which will be in healthcare, might well be a European wave. And as Siraj already mentioned, we've got 5.5 million software developers in Europe. The US only has 4.5.
And they're far more loyal than the ones in Silicon Valley, as you mentioned in your keynote. They stay longer, they're bonded to their companies. So to close up this European discussion, what do we say to somebody who brings us the next graphics and say the top 50 companies in the world in the field of AI are USA and China? Do we say that's not the right perspective, or what's the answer?
The #1 place for AI is actually still DeepMind. It may be owned by Google, by Alphabet, not by Google actually, but it's run independently and
the people are in Europe.
And remains in Europe. It's fiercely independent. So the shareholders are global and American in some cases, but it's a European business.
I would say I'm not quite sure, because I think like I'm in this German-Chinese community, about AI, and I think we in Europe or also in the US, we don't really see a lot from Chinese companies, but if you see what they do, it's really amazing. So like a lot of research is not even in English. So it's just Chinese, and that's why we, do this regular meetings with Chinese companies like Tencent and Alibaba. And if you think about what DeepMind is doing and OpenAI, we should look at China.
Well, but then the question really is, if half of it or more of it is in Chinese, how is that relevant to the whole humanity? This is going to be a Chinese play. They are having 1.3 billion people that can consume everything that's being produced, but how do you bring that over? So how do you extrapolate what Google did for the whole world? How does China do that?
Well,
you touched.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if you look at China or India as well, like we always also forget India.
Well, India is English speaking.
Yeah, but it's still like an Asian continent. Right. They're coming to Europe. So we always had the thing that the past, China is this big country, very cheap costs, right, for people. Now it's different in the sense of way, right? They're creating a lot of IPs, sure. Right? And they're buying German companies, right? They're buying Austrian companies, right? So I think it's not about like being European, it's being global, like being a dominant player. And if I add to this his example as well from Siraj, we at Axel Springer, we, for example, tried to buy ProSieben, and it was blocked by the European Union because we would own the entire meter sector in Germany,
Monopoly.
Right? Monopoly. And that is the thing is, in the US, no one cares about this because, you start to create a global player, right, at the end of the day, and then you try to do something. But in Europe, everything is blocking. You will never be a global player at the end of the day like this.
So that's just on that point, and he touched on something incredibly important, which is that in 50 years, this idea of being a European company or a Chinese company or whatever else, in my opinion, is going to be completely otiose and redundant. You have more incredibly, only digital, cross-border, cross-jurisdictional, et cetera, companies with research laboratories all over the world, because the only way at present for genuine contributions and developments in different areas of technology that we're talking about and other areas is for that cross-pollination to occur. And at present, we're seeing a lot from China actually trying to come out, right? China spent a very long time absorbing and bringing in, not replicating identically, but converting into their own versions and rolling it out. And they got to a point where obviously they were able to leapfrog. A simple example of that is credit cards. Credit cards never caught on in China, right? And they moved directly to mobile payments. So they were able to take these steps very, very quickly, accumulate a lot of data, prioritize things at a government level, and begin rolling out. We may disagree about certain human rights things and censorship and so on and so forth, which I take very, very, very seriously. However, they did that for a very long time, and now they're beginning to roll out, develop this kind of green belt initiative and so on and so forth, and they're making tons of investments into Europe. I suspect that the approach that needs to be taken on the European side as well now, more and more on both sides, is more collaborative around joint research and so on. That's how you're going to get everything, in Chinese translated. You get collaborative research projects, commercializations, and so on, but also vice versa from Europe to different Asian countries, not just China, but the entire continent. This is beginning to happen much more.
Yeah, I'm wondering, just as a very quick point, how much of that we are living in our amazing, beautiful bubble here, and what happens at the population level, where what you can see right now in European politics is that there is a lot of local focus these days.
Correct.
There are a lot of politics that is very much populistic and a lot of nationalistic thoughts. And so I wonder how the globalization will move into this beautiful state that you are.
Agreed, but you need to define objectives towards what we're working at. A simple example of this is Malta. If you want to take Malta, yep. They got to a state where they understood these are the requirements we need to push forward in order to establish ourselves. And you may talk about the actual substance of many of the things that they've done, but they've pushed forward trying to roll out different initiatives around space, AI, blockchain, and distributed ledger technologies, and so on and so forth. And this is pushing and edging the EU at a very, very high level to begin making a large set of changes at the funding side, at the regulation side, so on and so forth, in order to better incentivize these types of innovations and so on. But you're right, it has to come from the local level, and that's what's going to drive a lot of this. This is what triggers the bottom-up approach, but this is where it's going to start. But there needs to be clear, defined objectives from the get-go, or nothing ever gets done.
Super interesting topics, and we could surely be talking about it the whole night. Let me see whether somebody from the audience has a question, and do we have some microphones maybe that we could pick up some questions? Any questions from the audience? Yes, we have one question. Maybe you can come forward a little bit and repeat the question.
Yeah.
So a question that just popped up in my mind is, there's one thing I'm not really buying. So if healthcare is one of the most important sectors, yeah, and data is one of the most important aspects of applying AI, and all the insurance companies have a lot of data on our personal health, yeah, why do you not do something like the financial institutions did in Germany with the Schufa, combine all the insurance data, anonymize it, and then put it out there as an open thing in order to develop something that creates a more healthy society as such? I mean, it's not that difficult to do, and there must be something behind that that drives that is not being happening. Yeah, so my question, so I'm not really sure, because that's a very...
Yeah, makes sense.
Should I take that? Yeah, so I think the truth is governments don't know what to do right now, and they're still trying to figure it out. The NHS, for example, is super, in the National Health Service in the UK is very sensitive about this data being available, because frankly, what's going to happen if you do that, if you make it all open, an American or Chinese firm will probably innovate quicker and just build something. So I think there's a bit of an advantage in a European business being able to jump through these hoops more easily and get access to this data. I actually see the data access and quantity of data being a bit less of a blocker. The big thing that the EU brings, which is great, is a large market. So if you're a business selling into just Germany or just the UK or just Switzerland, whatever, that's very difficult for you to build a big business. And sure, you could figure out how to go into other markets. It'll take you some time. Meanwhile, someone will do the same thing in the US. They'll have access to 300 million people, and they'll just build quicker, and then they'll buy you. So the big tragedy of if we lose the great thing that's the EU is actually not the data. I think we can figure that out. Our startups can figure that out. It's much more about the market access.
Thank you.
I also would add one point, especially for Germany. I think we're not that digital where all the data is safe. So if you think about data, right, not everyone saves data. And we have also, this is the big problem right, at the end of the day, right? If you talk about data, insurance data or healthcare, just go to a hospital and you can ask yourself what kind of sensor data are they actually saving. Not a lot of hospitals are really digital.
So there's no actual authoritative data source with unique identifiers across the board.
I'm pretty sure that the insurance companies have a lot of valuable data that you could use.
But that's But you're touching on another point. Why would they do that, right?
But that's exactly my question. That is exactly my question.
Why would they do that? What is the incentive for them?
You said healthcare is one of the most important parts in order to create a healthy society for AI.
I didn't.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, but someone in the group. So why don't you do that? Because if you anonymize it, you don't have the...
But why would the insurance companies do that? That is my point. What's their incentive? How are they getting paid? How are they making money? How are they losing their advantage?
Do you think the state should regulate it and...
The question is, how much does the hoarding of data hinder us Europeans in particular, yeah, of actually getting to really interesting AI projects here?
An interesting side point actually to this, and I'll pass it on because this isn't my area of expertise, is that there have been a lot of reports lately, one coming out of the University of Cambridge, that actually identified this, this type of data enables you to be able to identify unique traits or anomalies and so on and so forth in populations and demographics and so on that can be targeted with biochemical weapons and so on and so forth. So that is a fear, and that is something that you would want to prevent. But I understand what you're saying. You could limit it to a degree where you're only sharing certain amounts of data.
I would say as soon as you clarify who owns the data, that story should be much easier to solve.
That's not
but you pointed a key question, which is standardization of data so that you can run these AI programs across very large data sets, hopefully across the European Union. And at the moment we don't, I think there are lots of people talking about it, but we don't have a solution.
But I suspect there will be a variety of kind of open source initiatives at an EU level that begin to roll out so that organizations in both state level and other can begin developing applications. I think it's a necessity. Every country has to get to that point where they do make this public so that you know, you've essentially removed the moat problem that he was describing, at least to a degree. So that organizations can compete at a completely different level than they are now, which is just access to data, which in my opinion is a complete waste of time for a lot of organizations, given the variety of hoops they need to go through. So on that point, I fully agree with you.
Sasha Munstein, a senior technologist at Pfizer, said in one interview with us that the health data, the anonymized health data is public good. Would you agree on that?
I think it's a good owned by every individual.
Yes.
That's what they're
anonymized.
It doesn't matter.
Anonymized.
Okay, so you don't think it should be a public good?
General healthcare data?
Yes.
There are two sides to that. I agree that some level of data should be provided to the public to be able to build things on. What that level, what that threshold on, and so on and so forth, I don't have an opinion on yet. There needs to be something that could be categorized like that. The rest is fully owned by individuals themselves.
I mean, if you're a cancer patient today, you're benefiting from all the innovations that went into the treatment of the cancer patient 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Those people kind of died, so you were able to learn and benefit, and your doctors could build treatments that you're benefiting from. So in a sense, yes, you know, as a society, our health data should be used as a public good. The challenge is the intersection of that and individuals' rights to privacy. You know, it's a very complex topic. I think that's why we don't have something like SHUFA collection of data. We've got to really be careful about this and navigate it the right way. But I think we will get there. I think in Europe we're being rightfully careful about some of this data. But by the way, the SHUFA example, that I know a company that's trying to do credit scoring in Germany, and they want to get the data from SHUFA, and they're blocking them because they are worried their position will be eroded, even though this is supposed to be kind of a national body now. So it's not the right solution, right? Sometimes you end up building something you think is the right answer, but then that creates its own set of challenges.
Maybe we
But
can take that. Yeah.
your question was if an individual hasn't given their permission, right?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Yes.
Yes. Final question, yes?
I asked one question. I think it was a very interesting conversation. We learned a lot about unsupervised learning, which I hadn't heard before. And if we talk about competition between areas, Asia, US and Europe, and about competition between companies, corporates, and AI is something good in itself, but imagine I'm a CEO and have to decide what kind of AI should apply to become more competitive. Is there also examples of bad applications of AI, or could you give us some leeway how a corporate leader should tackle this challenge of AI? Especially if he's an older person who has not really lived through the whole AI development.
Yes? Who wants?
I can jump in. Actually, you just did this, so why don't you start?
You can start when you want.
Yeah. Okay. So it's first of all, I think companies have to embrace startups and partner with them. So there are a lot of startups that are helping figure out problems. They're able to attract the talent that a big name, old kind of style company will not. Some of these young data scientists coming out of universities, they want to join the hot startup. So it's actually a way of accessing that talent indirectly, maybe as a shareholder, as kind of an investor. As far as internal changes within a big corporate is concerned, some corporates have really rich data sets that only they have. So taking advantage of that, probably the best way to get started is bring in a good consulting firm that understands what the new AI thing is all about. Element AI is one example I used, but there's some of the standard consulting firms also are doing that. It's just a way of getting the conversation going. I think that will then inform what is the next best step, whether it's building one's own team internally, which is actually pretty difficult. For some things it might be easy because it's more standardized, or then partnering with a startup.
I would disagree with bringing consultancy in the companies. I was in a consultancy. And I think it's more about like when you bring in a consultancy is like paying a lot of money for PowerPoint slides. But I would say it's depending
not
on
all of them. There are some good ones out there.
Yes, there are good ones, but I think overall it's always a chicken and egg problem, right? So if you really want to become an AI company, you need talent, right? You need people. You need the right person, you know, who's leading that. But the thing is, the field itself, I would say, it's very old. It's 60 years already when you think about machine learning. But like the hype, right, especially for Europe, it's just been like 5 or 6 years, because before that we had big data, right? Now, you know, everyone is machine learning and AI and so on, right? But then, you know, then itself, as I said, the field is new. There's not a lot of people, you know, with the right management and the right leadership skills, right? So, and then, you know, you don't have this person who has 10 plus, 15 plus years of experience who can go through this transformation. I myself, you know, I've been in a job only for 4.5 to 5 years, so I don't have this 20 plus years experience. But if you look at these big corporations now at Volkswagen or bigger companies, they're looking for this kind of leadership, right? So they look for people with 10 to 15 years of experience, but you can't find them, right? And then you don't really invest into people who've just been to 5 or 6 years. I myself was lucky because, you know, I had good timing. You know, I had contact to the board, right? So you know, this is just luck, right? But I know a lot of companies who just, you know, no, you know, you need 10 plus years of experience to be in this position, right? To do this kind of things.
What I would recommend in that case really is look at what's the business problem that you try to solve. We shouldn't do AI for the sake of doing it. Of course, it's important to have a, but what's the problem? What are you trying to solve? If there is a specific business problem in your area, then I would assemble a small team and do a pilot to see how can we apply AI, any of the elements in AI, to solve that specific business problem. AI without a business problem makes no sense to me.
Just a quick thing to add. I'd actually start very concretely. There's a book called Prediction Systems, which is a really good insight into what problems AI can start solving today inside of a business. Every CEO should read that, frankly. It's not that hard to understand. It's not written for engineers. That would start to get the ball rolling, and having a deep understanding oneself of what are the problems within my business that are prediction problems, that is a really good starting point as well. And but just to defend consulting companies, just really quickly, like, you know, you were lucky you had a board and an executive team that gave you that freedom. There's an education process I think consulting companies can do and are good at doing. And
just maybe one thing that, if not, I don't know, who heard about Elements of AI? The online course, 2, 3, 4 people. Go online and check it out. It's really for everybody. Elements of AI. It's been done by the University of Helsinki. And it's really basics knowledge. It's building blocks, and everyone can learn about AI. I think every CEO should do that, and everyone else, basically.
Very good, very concrete.
Like that.
If I may,
awesome. Yeah?
We've all given our 2 cents. The point that I would give to you, find your local university or high school. Go and ask the teacher or the professor if you can give the machine learning class or whatever class it is, kind of project on your company that they can do to work something interesting out or create something for their capstone project or their year-long project. That's what I would do. It will be good fun for you and good fun for them.
What happens to managers who don't do that, who don't inform themselves on a basic level at least?
That's the bigger problem, really. There is a lot of resistance in many companies because people just have fear of losing jobs and all of that. So we had that topic a lot, right?
They'll die.
Yeah. Die.
Okay, final question.
Quick question. Thank you. You're AI experts. I'm not. I'm an investor. What if there was an exchange specifically designed to allow data to be bought to develop AI? Have you heard of anything like that? Is there something like that exists so far?
You're talking about an exchange that's run by AI to buy and sell data?
Data haves, and there are data have-nots. There are AI tech haves, and there are AI non-capables, and they're not always the same. So there's some companies that have tons of data, this data is siloed, but these companies don't have the capacity to use it. And there are other startups usually that may not have the data but have the capacity to use it. And then there's a few that super valuable companies like Facebook, Amazon, Google, Apple that have both.
So in Berlin, there are a couple of initiatives also funded by this money that the government gave, right? This 3 billion. Now they reduce it to 500 million. And there is actually a project where you have, it's kind of a middleman, right? The broker. Yep. So you have companies providing data And then the other side, you have startups, so also companies basically who can, like, we have this problem companies, right, and startups come in, okay, we're going to solve that, right, and you provide us the data, but it's very kind of in a I would say draft thing, and I don't believe in that that thing, but that's why you are asking, right?
So companies do sell data to each other, if that's your question. There's no kind of public exchange, but data is repackaged, it goes through brokers, it gets sold from large company, airline to broker to the the duty free in the airport. So it does go across the board, but there is no kind of central exchange. Yes, there are some interesting initiatives moving forward around creating kind of data packets and derivatives of data packets that give you some sort of access to the underlying data, but it's a financial instrument, but that's still far out, if that's what you were interested in.
Yeah, I know about some projects in the blockchain area. So blockchain is the type of technology that makes this possible, where someone can prove the provenance of the data, prove the quality of the data, control the data, and let an algorithm train on it without ever revealing the data.
But it still suffers from garbage in and garbage out. If the data that goes into it is garbage, the provenance is irrelevant. The second thing around training AI on it, sure, you could use a regular database. The only reason you would use any DLT is if you had a necessary decentralized component to the system or to the output, which I highly doubt.
There's probably blockchain will probably be part of a solution in the sense of if we are going to compensate people for their data that fundamentally we don't know the value of right now. One way of compensating them is to kick the problem into the future by giving them ownership of something that we don't know what it's worth, but eventually might reveal itself. So that is one thing that, yes, I do agree with one facet, although the data set itself, the value of that data set, that's probably a more fundamental problem right now than how do we then track the provenance of it.
Could be a cool way to incentivize people in some way if you're creating digital assets tied to data.
Great.
Good question.
So we have 1 million topics to talk about, and I think you guys will stay a little bit longer here to have some drinks so you can approach the speakers and talk to them bilaterally. It's almost 9 o'clock, so we've been already way too long for tonight. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for all the insights, all the input. Amazing setup here. Thank you, I.E.C.T, for enabling us these discussions here in Tirol. Please have some drinks, have some snacks, and enjoy the bilateral talks with our speakers. Thank you very much, and see you later.
Thank you.